Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition, soon to be a part of the Roku TV network. Live from the All-America city of Morrisville in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States of America, we bring you greetings from wherever in the world you are to watch our wonderful show. On this show, we talk about innovation, global affairs, and discuss a post-COVID world and what we're going to do as we emerge from this pandemic. But today, first of all, before I begin my monologue, yesterday we honored the GOAT of tennis, Rafael Nadal. And I ended talking about 525,600 minutes, the musical famous score from the musical Rent. But if there was ever an athlete that could make a minute seem like an hour, sometimes a day, it was Tom Brady of the New England Patriots and then recently the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The most Super Bowls in history, 5 or 6, I think, I've lost count. This man was an amazing athlete, an amazing contributor to the NFL. He has announced pretty much that he's been retiring from football, but we want to thank him for living every minute on the football field like it was his last, for playing every minute on that football field like he meant it was going to be his last moment. And he delighted fans. I've never really been a big Tom Brady fan or a Patriots fan, but over the years I came to appreciate his commitment to excellence. He's actually close to a family friend of my father's in Boston, so we heard stories about him over the years. Tom, hope we see you in the commentator box, but if not, enjoy a long, well-deserved vacation. You will be seriously missed. Long live the GOAT, Tom Brady. Now, we are celebrating today, as I kick off my monologue, Black History Month. Black History Month is a month celebrated since 1976 by every United States president. It's also celebrated in Canada and some other nations of the world who designate a month for Black History Month. The purpose of this month is to celebrate the contributions of Black Americans to the political, cultural, economic, innovative vibrance of the American Republic, and also to talk about their struggles throughout history. This Black History Month, on this show, we'll be bringing in special guests. But my challenge today is, if you are watching or listening to this show, send us your ideas of a Black American we should be honoring. This is not going to be a political statement of them, but just whether they're Democrat, whether they're Republican, whether they're independent, Black Americans who contributed to the history and vibrancy of the American nation. We want you to send us in your ideas. Today, we're going to be talking about Black History Month from the perspective of our panelists. And before I bring them on, I also wanted to give a shout out to the Asian community of the world, because today is also the Lunar New Year, and my monologue tomorrow will be dedicated to that. The Lunar New Year is celebrated in China, Malaysia, Korea, all around Asia. And it's basically celebrating family and friends and a new year. This is the year of the tiger. Tigers are brave, strong-willed, pioneering, playful, enthusiastic, and fearless. I'm honored to serve with many tigers on this show on Pod TV. But from our family to yours, we welcome you to the show. We wish everyone a happy Black History Month and a happy Lunar New Year. And I will be beginning my message with the Lunar New Year, talking about the Chinese community of North Carolina tomorrow morning. Now, let's get started. I bring on with me today Mark Lee, our co-host and producer, radio celebrity. His face is all over Roku TV. Shaquille Latimer, the fiery political analyst from Down Under. And Nick P.O.D, if he's around, the founder of our network, the voice of reason, our boss, Nick P.O.D. And so, gentlemen, happy Black History Month to all of you and to all of around the world. And we're going to start with Mark Lee, just to give a quick perspective of Black History Month, what it means to you. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about Lunar New Year. They both fell on the same day. But Mark Lee, tell us a little bit about what you're feeling about Black History Month and the kinds of things that you think we should be talking about and the kinds of people that come to mind when you talk about Black history. There's not enough days in the month, but help me get started here, Mark.
Well, it's like you said, not enough days in the month to go over the history of the African American contribution to the population, and that would go for just about any ethnic group in terms of our contributions here to the United States and everything along those lines. But it is a time to reflect on some of the historical names that a lot of people already are very familiar with. I mean, most people, when they think of Black History Month, they think of the icons, people like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, of course, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and a number of others as well. We don't always remember and reflect on some of those that we probably should know, but it comes back to something that Nick talks about, which is our history books and our education system in general, because there are a lot of folks that are not as known as they probably should be. Many people are familiar to some degree with George Washington Carver, who found all kinds of uses for peanuts and things of that nature. But definitely, there's a person that is connected very much to even the discovery and the laying out of Washington, D.C., which sometimes people do not always think about that person. And I don't know how often that name is put in the history books. I would be curious to know whether either Shaquille or Nick have heard of the name of Benjamin Banneker, who is definitely a prominent name in terms of our history, a free African American man who lived in a slave state in the 18th century and apparently never knew the weight of slavery and all of that. But he was a native of Baltimore County, Maryland, and definitely was involved in a lot of the initial survey of Washington, D.C. And he also published abolitionist material and did things along those lines as well, and was very much a kind of a person that kind of put together what could be considered the paradox of early American history, because it's definitely a land of freedom and opportunity. That's oftentimes what we talk about even here, but there are also some things that got in the way of even his success, as even though he was a person that was able to talk to the country's founders in a way that many others were not able to, he still was considered in some ways three-fifths of a man at the time that he was coming up and doing some of the amazing things that he did during his life and all of that. But that would just be somebody that I would love more people to know about. I mean, we oftentimes talk about Washington, D.C. and what Washington, D.C. is all about, but how many of us actually knew that he was involved in the whole laying out of that structure and all of that? And some people might not
Wow,
even like him for that reason, because
fantastic.
sometimes you
Yeah.
get lost.
Yeah, let's go to Shaquille Latimer. Shaquille, once again, we really are grateful for Shaquille Latimer's fiery, great points that he makes, and we have a great relationship, all of us. But give us your perspective. And today, guys, we're going to take a little break from politics, and let's just talk about your perspective of Black history, Shaquille.
How is that
Your
taking a
perspective.
break from politics, though?
Well, no, let's not talk about Black
But but
Lives
but we
Matter.
no, but, no, but we are. That's the whole thing. We specifically are doing exactly that.
but
We're
but it's
taking
Black History
we're
Month.
taking a race. Yeah, but that's just an invention, right? There's no such thing. Like, that's just something that people have come up with in America. I mean, do you think that the people living in Africa care about Black History Month? Because for
Well,
them,
yeah.
their own history is what matters to them. Okay, so to not to use the great words of Morgan Freeman, but to relegate Black history to 1 month. Well, what's next? Are we going to have Indian American History Month?
There is
Good
an
idea.
Oppie month.
You
I think
know,
there's an Oppie Heritage Month. There is an Asian American Pacific
oh
Islander
well, wonderful.
Heritage
Any
Month.
more months we're going to have? Like, we're going to have months for every group
There is
except for the
there
white
is a
males.
lot of
Is that
months and
fair?
days, but is there any Black American that you can think of before we get to Nick that you think should is has been an important part of history? There's so many. Um,
Well, of course there's been so many. That's why they shouldn't be relegated. The history shouldn't be relegated to a single month. But I'll take a cheap shot. There is a guy by the name of Lewis Latimer, and he actually worked with Edison and Bell and a number of others. The original light bulb. I mean, I'm going back to high school days now trying to remember this. The original light bulb didn't last so very long. It only lasted for a few hours or a day or something, and he actually invented the new filaments or whatever so that the light bulbs would last a bit longer. And I think he also invented like a new toilet for trains. Back when railroads were a much bigger mode of transport in the United States. So same surname as me. We're not related, unfortunately, but I'll say that he is a historical figure.
that's fantastic. Thanks for playing the game. Uh, Nick, any that come to mind, I'll give you a few of mine. But I will agree with Shaquille Latimer. I mean, it is very hard with so many you know leaders in this country to just come up with 1 month. I mean, you just can't do yourself justice. And that's the problem I have, even in my newsletters and stuff. If I start doing one, I could end up writing 45 pages and still not get through. So that's why I came up with the idea of just send me your ideas, send us your ideas, and we'll post. So Shaquille, if you could put that in the link, I might post the that information about
What are the link?
The gentleman you just mentioned.
Well, I mean,
in the
it's something
private
I read when I was in year 7, so there's nothing to put in the link. It's in my mind. Something I have to do.
And I'll try to look it up and find it
Yeah,
out.
look it up. Or Mark
I'll
Lee,
look it up
even
and,
the one that you mentioned.
yeah, I will definitely put
Nick
Benjamin
Paladiva,
Banneker.
how about you as we celebrate Black History Month? What any Black leaders that come to mind?
Well, it has to be Martin Luther King, because he made a big difference in terms of changing the world, at least changing the United States of America, by his nonviolent protest and getting the Civil Rights Act. And he was definitely a forerunner of what was to become. And if you ever read through his speech, he's a great speech writer, great speech deliverer, great communicator, and very tough guy to beat in terms of that. In other words, his overall persona. Unfortunately, he was shot, killed. I mean, this is one of the problems of history. And the other problems that we have, at least this has been my experience, Steve, is that and history is written by the victors. In the United States of America, we are taught predominantly European history. In other words, when I took world history, it was, forget Australia. I know the mate down there. Okay, here was our thing on. Here was the total amount we learned.
What history do you want to learn?
Okay, here's what we learned about
America,
your country.
having been colonized by several European countries.
Okay, wait.
Whose history would you like to learn about? Antarctica's history?
No. What I'm saying, Shaquille, when we take world history courses in the United States of America, it is European history. You guys get one little tagline. Australia was founded by a bunch of bandits or prisoners that Britain wanted to get rid of. That's the end of our Australian history day. China is a country on the other side of the world, and they're all commies. And that's the end of communism.
But of course you're going to focus on European history.
Okay.
The majority of Americans are white who immigrated from Europe, bringing European ideals.
But the thing is, we're not talking about that. Gosh, we're saying this is our world history class, not our American history class, which will teach about America. This is Americans learning world history.
Nick and
little footnote down
Nick and Shaquille, I actually wanted to bring up a couple of things to come to Shaquille's points and everything. One, heritage in one's ancestry is not a anomaly to the African American population. There are many weeks and things that go on, whether they're weeks, whether they're months, whether they're days, toward just about every ethnic group, because there's like Italian American celebrations, there are Irish American celebrations, there are Polish American celebrations. So having a pride in one's heritage is not something that is new to the African American population. Yes, we have Black History Month. Some people would actually complain that it's the shortest month in the whole lexicon of months that are available and everything, because I've heard that complaint. But I do want to come back to, hold on a second, I'll let you respond to what I'm saying, but I want to come back to something that and it actually comes to something that you talk about a lot, Shaquille. One of the heroes that we talk about is Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King was definitely a hero. He was a hero of nonviolence. He was definitely a hero of trying to make change and everything. But how many of us actually know one of the greatest quotes that Martin Luther King said about the civil rights movement? It was actually a quote that he said that he felt toward the end of his life that he was actually integrating people into a burning building. Do you know what he meant by that? He meant that because, and this is something he said to Harry Belafonte, a great actor and everything, that Harry Belafonte has relayed to several people over several many years and everything. But what he was saying was that he felt that because of the whole push for integration and things of that nature, that he was afraid that we were missing the point because we were not addressing some issues that you oftentimes talk about, which is the issue of economic equality and the disenfranchised. His exact quote was, "I've come upon something that disturbs me deeply. We have fought long and hard for integration, and I believe we should have. And I know that we will win, but I've come to believe that in integrating, we're integrating into a burning house." And what he meant by that was that we weren't necessarily addressing the plight of the poor and the disenfranchised, which is what he felt that we should do more of. So I was wondering what your thoughts about that. And I just go to the rest of the quote, which is, I'm afraid that Americans may be losing what moral vision she may have had. Because I think Harry Belafonte asked him what he meant by that. And I'm afraid that even as we integrate, we are walking into places that do not understand that this nation needs to be deeply concerned with the plight of the poor and
guys,
the disenfranchised.
Let's go to
commit ourselves to ensuring, hold on a second, that the underclass is given justice and opportunity. We will continue to perpetrate the anger and violence that tears at the soul of this nation. So, Shaquille.
Well, let's go back.
Sasha, so.
Let's go to Sasha Starr. Sasha, thanks for being so patient. We're celebrating Black History Month, Black History Month edition. We know that it is celebrated also in Canada. I'm not sure when, but as a political analyst, what do you think of Black History Month? Are there any Black Americans that come to mind as we talk about this month that would just stand out to you?
First of all, I'm not aware that in Canada there is indeed Black History Month. I'm not aware.
It says it online. It says it online on their website, but I've not been aware of that either.
Could be, but whether it's, tell me exactly where is that? Is it in June, in January, maybe September, maybe April? I'm just not aware of that.
You're not really aware.
Now, speaking about Canada being multicultural, multiracial, multinational society, I think that issue would be very divisive for society if there would be a Black History Month and Colored History Month. And there is only one thing. Distinction was for many years, there was a Caribbean festival, I think at the end of July, and there was a Caribbean parade or so on. But it was closed several years ago because too many drugs and no visible benefits from it at all. So it's been closed for good. And I'm not aware there should be probably some Polish History Months, maybe Japanese History Months, maybe I don't know what else, but there is none. It's divisive. Don't you understand that when we are trying to unite society and make it a country with one homogeneous population focused on prosperity and advancement, this divisive issue as much as you can imagine. So if it's a Black History Month, where are the Asians? Where are the Latinos? Where are the white people? It's Black History Month. Okay, so and then what? What exactly is it? I really don't understand, and I don't appreciate that at all.
Well, I'm glad I've got someone that agrees with me. I'm going to respond to Mark's comment.
Notice that it's the people not from the United States.
I'm going to respond to
how we should run our country. That's always.
I'm going to respond to Mark's comment. So, Mark, you talked about all these other days, and one of the days that you talked about was the Irish American Day, right? And then you, as you normally do, tried to bring other things in and sort of flip it into that. So you said there's nothing wrong with being proud of one's heritage. Nobody's saying that there's anything wrong with that. Of course you should be proud of your heritage. Of course you should. But you want to force white kids to talk about Black history, which is fine. That's no problems. As long as you're going to force Black kids to talk about, on this Irish American Day, all of the achievements of Irish Americans. Until that happens, okay, what we have is the disparate treatment of different races. And as Sasha said, it's divisive. And personally, I think, as somebody who is apparently not white, I think that that's really insulting, actually. Now, if you want to talk about the achievements of Black people in the United States and in its history, just talk about them as if they're Americans. You know, we have some people within the Black community that talk about being otherized. And then the Black community goes out there and says, look, we're exactly the same as you, treat us exactly the same, except for when it doesn't suit our purposes. When it suits our purposes, we want you to give us, a position on the Supreme Court. We want to be judged by our skin color for jobs and applications at university and all those sorts of things. And what ends up happening is that people that have worked really hard, who perhaps have got lucky, have got some skills, whatever, instead of their achievements being reflected in how people look at them, the only thing that people judge them by is their skin color. That is a massive backward step, and I'm never going to support it.
Yeah, but
and
I think
you also said that you're not going to support HBCUs and a number of other things. So what else is new? By the way,
I didn't say that. I never said I wasn't going to support HBCUs. I never said that.
Well, I'm just
Well,
giving you a hard time. But just to come back to Sasha and everything, just to let you know, and I don't know all the people that are existing within the Canadian political system, but there was a statement earlier today. Today is February 1st and everything by a minister Hussein on Black History Month. And it was actually released from Ottawa earlier today. But he said, today we celebrate the beginning of Black History Month, a time to honor and celebrate the legacy of Black Canadians and their communities. For over 400 years, Black communities in Canada have played a significant role in all parts of our society and have helped make our country what it is today. This year's theme, February and Forever, celebrating Black history today and every day,
well,
reminds us to
So it's not
recognize
really Black
and
history
reflect
then,
on
is
the
it?
remarkable accomplishments and lived experiences of Black Canadians, past and present, not only in February, and this is where it kind of comes into the conversation with you were saying, Shaquille, but all year long. Black communities
yeah.
have continued to make
But once
continue
again,
to make
but once
and continue
again,
to make a
it's not
difference
Black.
in all areas, including academia, health, sciences, businesses, sports, the arts, and the front line of the COVID-19
Hey,
pandemic.
hey,
They have
Once
shown,
again,
and then
it's
I'll
not.
end this
It's not
quote and
actually
everything.
Black.
They have shown resilience, innovation, and determination in the face of ongoing barriers, inequalities, and systematic,
now,
which is something that I've talked about before, anti-Black racism that still exists in our country. He meant Canada. He was not talking about the United States.
Well, okay, now let me respond to just a couple of things. First of all, it's not Black history, that isn't. It's just Canadian history. And secondly, what do you mean they've shown resilience? Really, they have? Like, what would not showing resilience look like? I mean, come on.
If you have systematic
This kind
racism,
of
and part of what this
wishy-washy
prime
talking
minister has said
down
is that
and
he feels that there's
patronising
systematic
people,
racism,
you know.
and you are showing resilience by going up against
Booker,
that.
let me
then
let
that
me
is
Like,
interject.
considered
you show
resilience.
resilience because you were born into a place. Well, what about Rwanda? What if you're a Hutu or a Tutsi and you're growing up in a war-torn place? I would say that's pretty resilient, but you're not showing resilience. You're just trying to survive like every other creature on this planet.
So let me take a quick role here as a moderator and get us back on track. I mean, first of all, I will say that just in terms of the first exercise was Black Americans, and so I'm going to try to bring someone from the Shiloh community this week
Mhm.
or next week in Morrisville, the freed Black slaves that actually started the Shiloh community mining tobacco crops in Morrisville, and they worship here at the historic Shiloh Baptist Church, which was actually started when they were forced to leave the original Shiloh Church, which was because of segregation, and that's been there since the 1800s in Morrisville. But it comes to mind for me, I think of Thurgood Marshall, separate but equal. I think of Katherine Johnston at NASA, who brought Glenn from the heavens. There's a lot of Black Americans that we often don't think about, not the main ones like MLK and others. Of course, Obama, the first Black president, even though he was half white American. And it goes, I mean, his father was Black, but his mother was white, right? So,
So Obama would celebrate only 2 weeks instead of a month, right?
but anyway, let me take a retort at Shaquille's point. I agree that we don't want to go into every conversation with race dominating and assuming, okay, we're only going to treat certain people a certain way because they're Black or they're white or they're Chinese or they're Asian. But I think where I'm coming from, my perspective on this issue has changed. Is I've looked at data in America to look at the numbers that just say, there is, first of all, there has been terrible racism against Black Americans as you look at the history of the nation. Okay, they were brought. I mean, it's not something to laugh about. They were brought in on slave ships.
It's
They
just
were
not
beaten.
true.
But yes, they
What?
were. They were. What are you talking about? They were beaten like animals. They were separated from their families. They were treated. I mean, like you wouldn't even treat your own pets. Cruel animal treatment. Okay, that's how they treated the Blacks. And for us to stand here and say that there wasn't any racism, okay, the fact is that there has been gentrification. There has been a deprivation of success because many Black Americans for over 100 years, they weren't even given an education. They were given freedom, right? But then they didn't know what to do because they couldn't read, they couldn't write. Now, we have to make the conversation positive. I agree with Shaquille that we don't want to go in bitter and just say that, well, I'm Black, I'm going to carry, give me everything I need because I'm Black. But I think we need to address the disparities that exist. We have to bring the next generation to parity so that we can still have these conversations. I'm an Indian American, okay? I have never been raised by my father, who's conservative, like Shaquille. Shaquille, you say you're not a conservative, but when I was brought up, I was
Well,
brought up.
I'm only a conservative. You're a moderate.
No, but I was brought up in a predominantly white state. I was the only Indian kid, brown-looking kid in my entire school. When I was bullied, sometimes they would call me Tonto. They would ask me what tribe I lived in. When I said I was in India, they would laugh. They would say, "Why does your mom have a red head, a red dot on her head?" And every time I would, why is your, every time I would say something, they beat me in the face, take my lunch money, and do it again. And I would cry. I would go back to my father, but my father said, first of all, not every West Virginian is a racist. It might have been a bad experience. People didn't understand, but he always taught me, you just don't pretend that you're brown. Be the best you can. So that actually shaped my life. Where I work, um, for the last 30 years, I work 13 to 14 hours a day, and I don't stop. And I work on Saturdays and Sundays. And my whole life has been about being the best I can be in whatever I do and outwork anybody. So I've
Steve,
grown up with that mentality of not
wonderful.
using my race as a thing, but there is out there racism towards Black Americans, and that's why I think we have to acknowledge it. We're not saying so. Anyway, that's what I want to say. I'm going to defend that, and my position on this has changed over the years. Sasha.
Steve, a quick question. If there was a discrimination and the inhuman treatment of blacks, so like during the centuries in United States, and there is, as we understand, Black Month, Black Achievement Month, or but Black History Month, or so. And now we've learned from Marx that in Canada there is some kind of Black something history or something. Okay. Now, so would you suggest that in Canada blacks were also discriminated and
Yeah.
treated badly for centuries?
I would assume so. I haven't heard much about it.
Okay, let me
I don't,
help you
yeah.
out. In America, in Canada, unlike in United States, there were no black community period until maybe beginning of the 20th century, when some people from Caribbean, black people from Caribbean, which are very different from African Americans in the United States. They're very different people. Not only the way they look, the way they behave, their composition. And there was never discrimination against them because they were very obedient. They were very grateful for opportunity to come to Canada. They were hard workers and they blended into community really well. So there was never no discrimination against black people in Canada. That's why I found it very strange when Mark read this announcement from whoever it is about Black Months in Canada. That's
Well,
laughable completely.
I think that Shasha, thank you for sharing. I don't know where we get these, sources. There's all kinds of stuff. Let's shift the well, as we get into some other things going around the world, it is that we did want to devote about 30 minutes to Black History Month. The other thing that I think it's important to do, and I am going to try to do this, is to bring some Black Republican perspectives. I think it is. There are. I know I have a political analyst that he comes from time to time on the show. I think his name's Harold Eustace. He's a lawyer. He's a Republican, Black American. There's Reginald Lowry, who's a lobbyist here. He's a Republican. I think he's on the UNC Board of Governors. Was on the Board of Governors. So there are Black Americans that are actually Republican, and I would be interested to get their perspective.
And we heard,
Because
and we heard
sometimes,
and we heard part of those perspectives, not because he's a Republican, he's actually a Democrat. But as I recall, his dad was a Republican and actually a very prominent Republican. But when we heard from Floyd McKissick, I want to say that he was definitely a supporter of the Nixon presidency and kind of the Nixon ideas of zones, enterprise zones, and things along those lines. So even though Floyd McKissick Jr. is definitely lists himself as a Democrat, I'm pretty sure that his father considered himself at least a Republican or an ally of the Republican Party. So that was a case of somebody that I knew that felt within that system as well. Sasha, you use terms like obedient and other things. So, there are some folks that might have a problem with that in the description of the way that you're saying that these people integrated into the system and everything, because there are some folks, even those in Canada, that would argue that there is some racism that exists in Canada, whether that's toward African Americans or Caribbean Canadians, as you just said, that there is quite a few of them there and everything. And there is, even in Canada, some systems in place, whether that's in the banking, whether that's in housing, or whether that's in other places, that folks in that area, and yes, I do have relatives that live in Canada, would say have some issues in the sense of the way that people are treated of different descent and things along those lines. Now, in urban areas, yes, there are probably more improvements in urban areas, but in some of the rural areas, maybe not as much so. Now, I will acknowledge that Canada did play a very significant part even in the slavery rebellions and the slavery fights that were going on, because yes, if you were going through the Underground Railroad, a lot of people were escaping to Canada, because Canada was seen as a place that didn't have as much problems as the United States did, and also a lot of those cities weren't developed at the time. So yes, there were some tribes from Indian background and others, including some liberal white Canadians, that were helping people get into Canada. I want to say that even Harriet Tubman, part of the Underground Railroad, was going into that area as well. She was definitely considered a fierce leader in terms of freeing people from some very harsh realities. Now, Shaquille also, I think in past shows, has said that he doesn't think that systematic racism exists, even though I have pointed out insurance, I pointed out hospitals, I pointed out education system, I pointed out a couple of other things.
You can point to something, but give me some evidence of it. Give me some evidence of it, okay? Otherwise, here's what I'll do, right? I'll do these sorts of tricks. I looked at the numbers the other day, and I realized that black people in America only represent 13% of the population, but yet almost half of the financial penalties given in the NBA are given to black people. So therefore, I conclude that the NBA must be racist. Not because there's disproportionate amounts of blacks playing the NBA. No. Half of the fines given to players in the NBA are given to black players. Only 13% of the population is black. Therefore, the only possible conclusion is that the NBA must be systemically racist.
Well, first off, if you want to use the NBA, first off,
hang on, I'll let you go. Let me respond. This is the sort of logic that is constantly pushed up there. Okay, Steve's just talked about how terrible the treatment was of blacks in American history. Okay, there's no question that the treatment of blacks was terrible. There's no question that there were lack of educational opportunities and blacks were not able to read and write. But was that unique to the United States? Because we're going to have to compare something with something. Throughout most of human history, we have been dirt poor. Women have been relegated to the kitchen to cook and clean, look after the kids because they had to, because families were dirt poor, living off the land, trying to survive. In England, at the same time as you had black slaves in the United States, do you think the literacy rates were particularly high? They were sending white British kids down mine shafts at 3 and 4 years of age, completely naked because of how hot they were, and these kids would die down there. Was that treatment any better or worse than the treatment given to black African Americans that were held as slaves? And by the way, was it white people that went to Africa and enslaved them? So as I said, if we're going to walk around with this constant chip on our shoulders about this happened in history and that happened in history, let's compare history to all of human history. Let's compare it to the things that were going on in Europe. You think the Europeans treated other white Europeans well? You know, when they used to skin them alive and boil them what do the Greeks do? They boiled them in hot oil and all these terrible tortures and things that they've done throughout European history. Do you think that the motivation for why they treated blacks like that was because of racism or just because that's how humans were? We have done horrible things to each other all throughout our history. And to freeze history in one spot and say that these were the last lot of people that were treated badly, and so therefore for the rest of human history, we're going to walk around with this continual, perpetual chip on our shoulder. I'm not buying it. I'm not doing it. Who knows what my family went through at the hands of British people when they were forcibly taken from India to Fiji? What about the caste system? There's all sorts of people that have struggled and suffered throughout history. I'm not playing this game.
But let me give you
let
me give you an example that there were 1,000 years of fights in Europe White people against white people, Germans against France, France against England, and even before First and Second World Wars, they were centuries of fights. So can you then say that, well, because of these fights now we want to make it right? No. In after Second World War in the early 50s, there was a history of uniting Germany and France and few others, mostly Holland and Belgium, and it was 6 countries at the beginning, to create something what later on became European Union, and which is still functioning and fairly successful, I might say. There are some problems, but they're still functioning, learning to work with each other, and so on. Shakil, about your example of NBA, I totally agree with you, but I want to add something that remaining white people in NBA, they're all from former Yugoslavia. So American whites, they're excluded. That sport doesn't exist for them, period.
Well, first off, I'm going to get back to your NBA example. And no, I'm not going to get caught up. Hold on a second.
I was going to say one last thing here.
First off, Shaquille, I'm going to let you get back.
The area which is called the Slavic region, that's where we get the term slave from. And I tell you, there's not very many blacks over there. They're all pretty white. And who was enslaving them?
Hey,
the North African
Shaquille, you're playing one of the greatest games of all times and everything. And I've seen it before. I'm here to tell you the game that you're playing. It's a game that many people play all the time and everything. It's a game called the Oppression Olympics. And I'm not going to get caught up in the Oppression Olympics, which is where you try to compare your bad things to other things, and I'm not going to get caught up in the oppression Olympics and everything. That's what you're doing. You're playing the game of the oppression Olympics, where you kind of like make a comparison between, say, what the Germans went through. And I do not say that the Germans did not go through some harsh times. The Holocaust was very real. The Holocaust really happened, and all of that. I'm not going to play the oppression Olympics with what goes on in Rwanda and other places. That does not say that you are not. Hold on a second. Just let me finish. I'll let y'all finish. So I'm not saying that these things do not exist and that they are not problematic, but I'm saying that part of what you have to do in these conversations is find solutions. And yes, there are problems. If you mentioned the 13% population, if there are proof and evidence that exists, and it exists around the country, and I'll bring up some statistics if you want, statistical games and everything about what happens when people go to banks, what they happen when they go to housing, what they happen when they go to other things and everything that are disproportionate, even what goes on in the prison system. We had this thing called the war on drugs. Let's be very real. That was the war on the inner city. Like I said, if you got busted for doing drugs, hey, if you got busted for doing drugs in other places, it was not as common. Hey, Nick, I'm gonna bring Nick into this and everything. Nick, who is a lawyer, probably will agree with me that a lot of times.
So hang on. I want to try and play race and everything. I want to try and play the mental acrobatics.
Hold on a second.
Hang on a second. I just want to play the. I try very hard to play the mental, acrobatics that's required to think in that way. I do the same thing when I play chess with Sasha. I try to work out what he's up to. Right? I never quite managed to work out what he's up to, but I'm just going to try and understand this. The war on drugs was about inner cities. So what's the reason for Australia banning drugs, or New Zealand, or Asia, or like Singapore, and all those countries where the death penalty?
There was a
how come all those other countries have the same war on drugs as well?
During the Reagan administration about the war on drugs, all I'm asking you is, who was the targeted group in that war on drugs? Who was the targeted group?
Mark,
who was the targeted group?
Mark,
there was no targeted group, Mark. Sasha has a game of chess with Nick, and Nick beats him. And then Sasha has a game of chess with me, and Sasha beats me. It's not that Sasha beat me because he's racist, and he didn't beat Nick because Nick's white. That's absurd. And that's
not absurd. I want you to look at the statistics. I want you to study the statistics of even what's going on. We have a show here called We Wednesday. I want you to look at how many people have been prosecuted that are African American descent.
We need a timeout for a quick drug commercial.
Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everybody. It's Jeff Biken, Hemp and Puree, and we are having a great Weed Weeds Day show this week on February 2nd. at 12 Pacific. And don't forget, we're going to have Tommy Chong on this week, so tune in and watch our replay and share it with everybody. They're going to talk about their NFT drop with homies in Dreamland. See you then. We're on P.O.D. TV. Thank you so much, P.O.D. TV, and hemp hemp, hooray.
That other stuff don't make you feel this way. It ain't no good for you. No need comparing, cause it just ain't the same. Now not Mary Jane, I've been waiting all day.
So real quickly, before we get back into the thing, I mean, let's make sure that we're going to have disagreements on the show, and I think it's just I think it's about solutions. But real quickly, let's take a break and go on a couple of things going on in the world. FDA just approved Moderna. It's going to be marketed as Spikevax. It turns out that Donald Trump has 122 million in the bank, which is more than the Republican National Committee. So that's interesting. DeSantis is emerging as a presidential contender from Florida. We don't know whether he's going to run against Trump. Maybe if Trump doesn't run, it'll be DeSantis. And I'm trying to look at other worlds, and then Pfizer's looking at FDA approval. We're going to talk tomorrow about inflation and kind of why it's happening, but not only why it's happening. The fact of the matter is that it's been really, really amazing how far away from normal our lives have become, and people with crime, drugs, blood pressure being high, other healthcare issues that we're having. And that's added to, I think, frustration from the American people, in addition to fighting supply chain disruptions, stockouts at stores. Someone yesterday complained that they were paying $1 for a lemon or 50 for a lemon. It used to be 50 cents. And then but anyway, I just want to throw that out there as some things to talk about. But back to our Black History conversation. Be great.
I would like to add something. Remember that all the coming back to a question of slavery, I want to mention something that the black people who were arriving to the United States, they were enslaved in Africa, not in the United States. They were slaves in Africa, number one. Number two, the Portuguese traders were bringing them, and not even in the United States at first. They were bringing them to South America, Brazil mainly. They were bringing them to Caribbean. And only by an accident in 1619, one ship who couldn't unload their slaves in, I believe they were sent originally to Mexico, but the deal didn't go through, so they went to Bermuda. Nobody wanted them in Bermuda either, so they ended up in Virginia. And guess what? These slaves, so-called, in America, there were less slaves than anybody else because they were gaining they were living in the same houses as the so-called slave owners. They had good jobs there. And in a few years, they were all free and they let go. So there were evidently no slavery at first. Slavery is invention of Africans themselves. They enslaved them and then gave them or sold them to Portuguese traders. The Portuguese traders brought them here in America, at first to Latin America, then to United States. That's where it all started. So at least be respectful to the history. And
I'm going to be respectful to the history, and I'm going to disagree with you and everything. One thing is there's such a thing as called revisionist history, and I love your revisionist history that you just gave and everything, because slavery was definitely not a fun thing that was held by African Americans. Yes, there was slavery in other parts of the world. Yes, slavery has been going on since the days of the Bible. So yes, I'm not going to say that slavery hasn't been something that has happened in history throughout history and all of that, but I'm also not just going to let it go by thinking that there was like this whole kumbaya kind of feeling going on the slave fields. And yes, there were people that were considered field, and I'm not going to use that N word, but yes, there were field that N word, and there were house that N word. And there are some people that would argue that that is still going on in the modern day society. And there's some people that might be a little bit more prone to being involved with folks and everything. And I'm not going to use
with the exception of people that are being held against their will. How is that
Since you
happening,
are
sir?
always loving us talking about what's going on in the United States, you know, y'all got some incidents going on as well over there in Australia. I was doing a little bit of research this weekend and everything, and yesterday, and I saw that there was a young lady, that is playing on y'all's Australian football team that apparently decided that she was not too happy about a pride jumper due to her faith, because she is a Muslim American and she's afraid that you know, that she's not wanting to wear and support the LGBT community, because apparently her team wanted to wear a jersey that was going to reflect their support for that community and all of that. And definitely she is saying, wait a minute, hold on, I got some issues with this because of my religion. Now, there are some people, and I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree, they would argue, well, wait a minute, you have issues on one side of not wanting to support folks, but at the same time, your own religious background has had some things that have gone up against the way that women are treated and other things in that regard. Because as I was reading, I did see that
What are you
argument as
talking?
well.
What's the point
your
you make?
story
You're talking
about
women's
Halim
slavery and the pride
Sariki
flag.
and what is going on in that case. Like I said, I'm not in Australia. Nick has
Yeah,
made
but
it
what does
very
that
clear
do-
that you are the
what does
voice
that
of
have to do with
Australia.
slavery?
So I would love to hear your thoughts about this case, which is another case, and I guess you might think it of people being too woke, even in your area of Australia.
Of course, I think people here are too woke. Who the hell? I mean, that's what I said yesterday. All of a sudden, the resistance is comply with government. People are out there protesting that you must obey government at all times. What sort of insanity is this? It's like Donald Trump, the free market capitalist dictator that you guys tried to convince me off last year or the year before. Okay? Why should somebody be forced to wear a shirt that says, I support a certain political cause or religious cause or whatever? Why should they be required to do that? If she doesn't want to wear it, she shouldn't have to. It should be as simple as that. Here you guys are, we want our freedom, we want our liberty, we want to be able to do what we want to do, but we want to force you to also do what we want to do. Okay, no.
She could ask for certain monetary inducement and just ask for, I know, a couple $1,000 for wearing this.
She's refused. But if you want to start with that conversation. If you want to start with that conversation, Mark, a Christian school up in Queensland, that's the state north of New South Wales where Sydney is, has made its students and faculty and parents sign a contract stating that if you do not identify with your biological sex, you can be expelled from the school. And they've had almost 30,000 people sign a petition to tell that school not to do it. And my personal opinion is if you don't like it, don't send your kids there. Just like if I don't like my kids being, I don't have any, but if I don't want my kids exposed to a particular type of ideology, I should be able to choose not to send my kids to that school. And if all public schools now want to embrace the term birthing person and chest feeding and make everybody genderless, okay, if other people want to do that with their kids, that's up to them, okay? What do you call your grandmother? Your grand birthing person? I mean, it's just absolutely absurd to so many people, and it's been forced against people against their will. And so people have every right to say, we are going to have our school, and at our school, these are our rules. And if you don't like it, that's okay. We respect your right not to like it. Just don't come to this school. Go somewhere else.
You say it's being forced against their will, but we've also talked about this show several times about critical race theory. I've been fortunate to have some guests in the education field and everything, and they all bring up the same thing, which is that critical race theory is a red herring because it doesn't really taught in the school system. They cannot name a school system where it is actually taught in the sense of being an actual course that is actually taught in the course and everything. It is actually more of a higher education system that is taught more on the upper level, like almost on the grad school level, not even on the college level, more like the grad school level. And
Mark,
so people going to graduate medical school, they're the ones studying critical race theory. Is that the theory there? People doing their MBAs.
People in the education field is that
trying to work out how to run
a school system where there's actually somebody teaching something called critical race theory, and it is actually named that critical race theory in elementary school, in grade school. It is a philosophy that was created on the academic level and all of that.
They
and
don't
coming
need,
back to one other thing that y'all brought up earlier, the NBA. I was not going to let that go by without getting
NBA.
onto it before Steve closes out the show and everything. Part of the problem with the NBA is that, yes, while the players may be majority African American, what is the ownership? The ownership is not, and that is part of the conversation that has been had, even by the players themselves, is that they would like to see greater efforts to have more ownership within the NBA of the teams.
Mark, in no conceivable way was that a response to what I said. What I said was, based on the analysis of statistical numbers that you guys are pushing forward in order to justify why there is this systemic racism in the United States, if you were to base an analysis of the NBA in the same way, you would have to conclude that if half of the fines that are given out by the NBA are given to black people, and black people are only 13% of the general population, the NBA must be racist by your reasoning. That was the point that I made.
No, and my counterpoint to that was, what is the ownership? What is the ownership?
Mark, can I answer your question?
What is the ownership?
That argument. You just don't want to concede a single point.
I'm not going to concede up that point when the ownership is definitely.
Let me answer your question about ownership.
In all
yes, Sasha, please answer my question about ownership.
It's a very simple issue. You probably are aware how much money the stars like LeBron James and many others, Steph Curry and so on and on and on, how much money they are making. We are talking about billions and billions of dollars put together. If they wanted to, they could buy all teams of NBA from its racist owners and own NBA and own and play and do anything what they wanted, and even to fire all the Yugoslavian players and hire more black players. So it would be all black NBA, all black ownership, all black, and white people wouldn't be allowed to go to the stadiums, and there would be only black.
Sasha, it's interesting you bring up that point.
Why wouldn't they do that?
But Sasha, it's interesting you bring up that point, because that is one of the arguments that people make in the African American community, is that too often people have the success, they have the amount of success that they want, and then they choose, for whatever reasons, not to come back into their community and actually do enough of that use of the money and actually develop the areas, and in some cases, areas that they came from that were definitely significantly poor. Now, I will give LeBron credit. LeBron has done a very good job of going into Ohio and Cleveland and actually reaching out into his community. I think Seth has done the same thing. So there are cases of people that have done really well into that regards and everything, but there are some other ones that have literally, couldn't run, and that's across the board.
So Mark, let's get back to the, because you sort of always do this, and you don't want to answer the questions, and you don't want to concede any point. What exactly do you want from American society? What do you want the government to do? Black people aren't coming back into their community. Should the government force them back into those communities? Is that what you want?
Force them. What you do is you encourage them to come.
Why don't you articulate in very clear terms, one, what you want America to actually look like, and two, how you think that can practically be achieved? Because you seem to want there to be zero disparities amongst the people. Absolutely none. So exactly how do you want to achieve that, Mark?
Well, like I said before, and some people may say it's a Shangri-La kind of attitude and everything, but I think that people should, one, be proud of their heritage and be proud of their, even if they have mixed heritage. I'm proud of both my Native American side, as well as the African American side, as well as a little bit of European American side as well, but more the African American side, the predominant part.
What do you want the government to do?
Hold on a second. One, I'm not asking for government handouts. I'm asking for the groups themselves to help, and that's what most of the people that I am associated with are asking for as well. So they are talking about creating programs that will then help the people within those communities. That's mostly what we talked about in the Black Leadership Conference that I've been part of.
There's nobody on the other side of that argument. There's nobody out there except for people telling white people to be ashamed of their heritage. There's nobody out there saying to any personal minority, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed of where you come from. So there's nobody on the other side of that argument. There's nobody on the other side of the argument of, oh, we don't want you to have programs to help your community. Nobody's arguing for that. So once again, what is it exactly that you want America to do for you and your community that they're not doing right now?
I want them to, one, address the things that exist that are problematic, which is the prison system and things of that nature. it and then
No,
find
what would you
solutions
like them to
to
do?
work on it. Find solutions to work on it. I think that you've done some work in that field from our conversations we had and everything. So I acknowledge those, and I say that those are great programs. So I'm saying if we find these problems and we work on solutions, if there are problems with banking, and there are problems with banking, if there are problems with housing, if there are problems with a number of other things, and there
Okay, so
are
let's
leadership
just
on
stick
the
to
local
one
level
topic then.
and the
Let's stick
state
to
level
one.
and
Let's
the
talk
national
about
level.
banking.
I think that it all
Let's talk
starts
about
primarily.
banking.
Would you hold a second, Shaquille?
Do
I
you
said
want to
it
see the
starts
banks be
primarily on
forced
the
by
local level.
government? Do you want to see the banks be forced by government to give loans to black people, regardless of whether or not they can afford them? Would that be a good solution?
No,
Because
I mean, you got to make sure.
the
No, I'm
last
not saying
time the
that you're not
government
going to give
tried
them
to
loans that they
intervene in the
can't
banking
afford. I'm
sector,
not going to say
you
just like
might
you're not going
remind
to give them.
yourself of what happened in 2007 and 8 when banks were told, just go and give the money out, what they called heartbeat loans. If you had a heartbeat, you got the loan. That was the
Well, I
result.
mean,
You had
that,
an
I'm
overheated
not trying to
property
create
market,
another
the whole
welfare
thing
system.
came
So
crashing down.
heartbeat loans, I'm not a favor of. I'm not a favor of kind of like
So what do
programs
you
of
want
things of
then?
that nature and things along that line. So no, I'm not saying go down that road, but I am saying that there are problems and there are things that are going that you can support. I mean, there are some black banks here that are in serious financial troubles and everything. And if you want to try to find ways to help those banks and everything, meaning not you, Shaquille, but either private
Hang on,
entities or
I'm a
governments
banker.
and
I'm a
everything
banker.
along
I
those
can
lines.
help the bank if I want to. What exactly would you suggest that I do?
Well,
Well, I mean,
folks,
have you met with mechanics and farmers? Have you met with Mutual? Have you talked to them about some of
No,
their
I
plight?
haven't met with those specific banks you're talking about, but let's just say that I did. Let's say I went and spoke to the bank that you've chosen. What exactly would you propose that I do for that bank?
Well, one, I would propose that they gave you a specific plan as to what they needed from you as a investor in order to make them more viable and more of
Okay.
a soluble bank and everything. And like I said,
Until that happens, that's further proof then that there is systemic racism that the United States is deliberately trying to oppress 13% of the population, even though economically speaking, having that percentage of the population more successful would be better for the country. But there's this huge amount of people walking around the United States that are deliberately trying to oppress black people in 2022.
in
That's the theory.
2022, yes, there is still efforts are going around neighborhoods. I could point out neighborhoods here in Durham. I could point out other neighborhoods. Steve just mentioned Shiloh, and I do hope that Angaza comes and he can talk to you about some of the things that are going on, both historically and in the past. But he is a member of that and also a labor organizer and a union organizer as well. So I don't know if that's one of the people Steve's going to reach out to, but I will reach out to him as well. But I'm sure that he would have some interesting concepts on that course of conversation and things along those lines. But
I do need some help getting
there are
guests.
things that are existing in society, even in the 21st century, that are very real, and therefore I'm not going to just like dismiss them. Whether it's the highways,
I'm gonna be
whether
on
it's certain neighborhoods, whether it's certain other things
Sasha,
that are
I
going on.
understand that there's some colored people in Russia, being such a big country. Do you reckon that Russia's going to introduce a Black History Month?
I don't know if Russia is,
by
but
the way,
the UK and Ireland
that
have.
racism in Russia is huge. The only thing is because there are no really black people like African Americans or African Russians. There are none of that, but there are people from Caucasus, especially it's Muslim republics such as the Dagestan and Ossetia, many others, but also even a lot of Georgians, Armenians. They have a somewhat darker skin than Russians.
Well, folks, that's about all.
And there is a huge discrimination against them, but that's a fact of life. Nobody is surprised, and people would never even raise the question, how come you're discriminating against our nation? They would be beaten brutally if they would ever raise it.
Well, we want to continue our discussion of Black History Month as we close out the show. I will need some help getting guests. We're a little bit behind, but we got a whole month. And tomorrow we'll be talking a little bit about inflation, maybe some memories of Tom Brady's career, and also talking about the Chinese, the Lunar New Year, and might try to bring someone to give a perspective of the Chinese and the Asian American community. And I've got some ideas of guests that we might be able to bring on. My theme of the year is 526,600 minutes. That's how many minutes we have in a year. And so today, use your opportunities to use those minutes wisely. And on the minutes on this show, you see a lot of political engagement, a lot of differences of opinion. But on World Edition, particularly as we join the Roku network, we want to be the show that's giving the real facts giving the honest to God truth of what we believe, expecting that those that stand with their different opinions, and trying to work through solutions of how we can solve the problem. That's what World Edition is about in the United States and around the world. From our family to yours, use those minutes wisely. Be safe wherever you are, and we'll see you tomorrow. Happy Black History Month and Lunar Year, and long live the GOAT, Tom Brady. Thank you.